This is Tamika De Souza interviewing Brian Woolland for Border Crossing. We are currently in Salisbury and it is the 1st of April 2026. So, Brian, if you would like to introduce yourself and
Okay. I'm Brian and I've worked with border crossings over, I forget how many years, but at least 25. I forget the dates. And I work with border crossings primarily as a playwright, but I also work as I work in educational drama and as a theatre director as well, though that's not directly what I've had to do with border crossings. So that's me.
yeah. So could you give us a brief overview of your upbringing?
My upbringing.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that. So, I came from a family with one sister. My parents they stayed together until my mum died at 81, and my dad died 2 years later when he was 83. They were more or less the same age. And I left home at 17. I didn't go to university. I went to a college of education to train as a teacher, and I went late. I didn't go till I was 20, so I went as a mature student. And in those days, those happy days, the fees were all paid, and there was a maintenance grant, so I didn't end up with debt. And I went because I didn't know what to do. I had no idea, and I just wanted an easy ride for 3 years. And I loved teaching. I found that doing it, I actually loved it. So I started my career as to a secondary school in Essex, a comprehensive in Essex, where I taught drama, which I'm sure isn't terribly relevant to this interview, but it was a very interesting experience. I did that for 2.5 years, and then I was kind of threatened with promotion in the sense, and what I mean is that I loved the teaching. I've always liked that, and I've never liked the stuff that goes with it. Right? And they were saying, you're doing really well, so in a couple of years you'll be deputy head of house, and head of house, your career path is. And I thought, it's not the career path I want. I want to work with young people. And so I left and went to work in a therapeutic community for maladjusted adolescents and seriously deranged staff down in Devon, and that was a horrific experience. I mean, the kids were difficult, but it was an independent setup, and it was a nightmare, a real nightmare. So I left, and I've been very lucky, incredibly lucky with my career, because from there I went to, my then wife and I went to live with friends in Suffolk, and we lived there, and I made a living briefly as a photographer and doing whatever I could, and somehow, and I have no idea how I did it, I landed on my feet and got a job as an advisory teacher for drama in Hampshire, and that I was there for about 8 years and ran an art, and that led to setting up and running an arts centre at a time when small-scale touring was in its heyday. So we had people like Mark Rylance, coming to an art centre with seated 100 people and coming for a week because they loved it, loved playing there. But with actors like Timothy Spall and Francis Barber in the cast of these plays, and it was a really good experience. And there's always a but, isn't there? And the but is that I was providing a social life, or the Art Centre was providing a social life for everybody around. and I wasn't having any kind of a social life because I was there from sort of 9 in the morning till 11 at night. And then my former wife and I had divorced. I met Mary, and we had a young child, and this wasn't the way to bring up a young child. So I started looking for other jobs, and amazingly, I got a job at what was then a College of Higher Education, which then a couple of years later merged with Reading University, and so I became, by the back door, a lecturer at Reading University. And in the meantime, I'd done an Open University degree, because I wouldn't have been able to get a job in university without a degree. I did an Open University degree at the same time. So I look back and I think, how did I ever have time to do any of those things? But there was I had a lot more energy, obviously. So I worked at Reading University, and so this is leading up to meeting Michael. So I'd been working at Reading University, mostly involved in teacher education, so teaching students to teach drama in schools, and that was why I was hired. But gradually I became more and more interested in other aspects of the work, and the department I was working in was brilliantly led, and at that time was rising up the rankings, and it became, I think, the third highest rated ranking for drama, for theatre in the country. And I developed a really strong interest in the plays and the theatre of Ben Jonson, the contemporary of Shakespeare. And I directed a play at Reading with students of a Ben Jonson play called The Devil is an Ass. And I could happily talk for the next hour about The Devil is an Ass, but that's not what you really want to talk about, is it? And I'd found a really good book about Ben Jonson written by Professor Richard Cave, and I'd invited him to this production, and he couldn't come, but he said, and then because he had something else on, and he then invited me to go and have supper with him in his house. So I went and had supper with this guy, and we then developed a really strong working relationship, which lasted for years. And he came to the next Ben Jonson productions I ran, and then he and I set up a major conference at Reading University, which we jointly administered. And Richard Cave, had jointly set up Border Crossings with Michael Walling. So we are coming back to focus. And we'd invited, we had all kinds of people coming. So there were academics, but there were also theatre practitioners. So, and we had Sam Mendes, who had just recently directed a production of Ben Jonson's The Alchemist, and he participated in the conference. And Richard had invited Michael to do with professional actors an extract from a very obscure Ben Jonson play called Poetaster. I think that's my memory. I think that's right. And so I got to know Michael. Michael invited me on the board to sit on the board of directors of Border Crossings. So for a while, my relationship with Border Crossings was like in a sort of, not an administrative role, but in that sort of board of directors role, which with the theatre company is really sort of providing advice and an occasional talking shop. And at the same time, I'd had a play on it in Fringe Theatre in London called Getting Over You, and he'd come along to see it and brought with him a Hungarian academic, Clara Bodish, and she saw the play, and afterwards she contacted me and said, could she do it in Hungary? And I said, yes, I didn't see it. And would you come out for a week and work with the students I'm going to do it with? Work on the play with them. So, which is, and because working in a university at that time, I don't know if it's still like that, but at that time, that was exactly the kind of thing the department really liked, because they could put it in the list of achievements.
Yes.
So I went out and worked with Clara and the students, which was a really interesting, really interesting experience. And I developed a working relationship with Szeged University. And Szeged is quite a lovely town on the about 15 miles from the Serbian border, and that was the time when the Serbian Bosnia
Yeah, they were
war,
having
the
conflict there.
yeah, and the last time I went there, the Kosovo War was taking place, and there were NATO's troops stationed in a sort of NATO advisors or whatever they call themselves, stationed in a large international hotel in Szeged, which was very strange. And I developed really good working relationships with people in the theatre in the university. I sort of ended up going back several times to do workshops with the students, and through those connections I was introduced to people at a theatre in Budapest, called the Kotoni József Theatre, who I also started doing, not writing work, but I was interviewing and writing articles about their work. And on I think it was the last time I was there, there was a young woman who had been a former student at the university who was assigned to me as my translator, and she spoke brilliant English, really good English, and she sort of took it upon herself to introduce me to other aspects of Hungarian life, as well as the academic aspects of Hungarian life, and she took me. One of the places we went to was this international hotel, just to experience it. We weren't having a relationship of any description, but it was a very strange relationship, whatever it was, because at one point she took me to a nightclub in Budapest, which was a very strange experience, with her boyfriend. So I don't know whether I was being used. I mean, I was a lot younger than I am now, but whether I was being used in some way to make him jealous. But we weren't having a thing. But she became. I came back from it. I've been writing theatre and education plays, which had been done. Some of them had done really well, and at the time. The chronology of this, I'm a bit vague about, I'm afraid. But,
it's okay. Whatever order you want to speak about it in, it's okay.
But do keep me on track if you want to focus.
Oh no, don't worry.
So, so I'd had done a number of theatre and education plays. I'd had an introduction to a producer at the BBC who was really interested in doing 3 of my plays, turning them into television plays, and we were working on it. None of them ever came to fruition, and he'd won a BAFTA and he really wanted to do them, and it was very frustrating. But I had an idea for around about this Hungarian experience. I had an idea for a play, and I started talking to Michael about it. And Michael was very enthusiastic about the idea for the play. And I said I couldn't. It would be a conflict of interest to be on the board and to be
also playwright or produce something.
Exactly.
Would this be double tongue?
Double tongue. Yes, that's right. Yeah. So it became double tongue. Yes, that's right. And Michael was, I know, it's quite a long time ago, but I mean, I was going into rehearsals, And I remember we had a really interesting event at the Hungarian embassy. But this was I think we had room. I think we did a rehearsed reading. I can't remember. So, but I do know that I made a number of changes in response to that reading. The play got a production at the Old Red Lion, which Border Crossing did a production at the Old Red Lion, and they revived it the following year and did it in Hungary, in Szeged, which is where it was set. And I couldn't go. I couldn't just.
Oh yes.
I couldn't go. I couldn't attend it. So we came back to the UK, toured. I think it did quite a long tour, and then it went into London, a venue in Stratford East, and was very successful. So and that was the first production of mine that was done by Border Crossings. So then, do you have any questions?
Oh yes, yes. Do you think that your unorthodox career path had any effect on Double Tongue as a whole, in your teaching experiences from when you started until you got to being a university lecturer?
Yeah, yes. And I always maintain, I've always thought that my experience of teaching educational drama, and a particular kind of educational drama, which is experiential, where you're working with children, young people, you are effectively functioning as a kind of a playwright. You're sort of creating situations in which they make decisions, and then you're working with them as a group to explore the consequences of those decisions. And I think that has always affected my writing. And I think that the unorthodox career path is undoubtedly incredibly valuable. I think I sort of feel really privileged to. I know that I'm incredibly lucky, because there's absolutely no. I knew when I was working at Reading, if I reapplied for my own job, I wouldn't get it. If I resigned and reapplied, because I didn't have an MA, never mind a PhD, and by the time I left, I was supervising PhDs and examining internally and externally, examining PhDs externally at other universities. But I didn't actually have one myself, and I never made any bones about it, didn't pretend I did. So, and I think that it's really difficult to just say how much I value it, and I think how important it's been for me. I think, and how difficult. I left Reading in my mid-50s because I really wanted to write, and to write full time, and I don't regret leaving. I miss working regularly. I've missed working regularly with students. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. So, in terms of the process of writing and early development of the play, could you give a brief overview of what that was like, from the experience in Hungary, and then the initial idea maybe, and then into the actual development, like casting and...
I can't really talk about Double Tongue because I don't remember. I do remember writing. I remember where I was when I was writing it, but I don't actually remember. I don't remember much about the experience, to be honest. I remember going into a few rehearsals. I remember specific moments where one of the cast, Serge, I don't know if you've interviewed Serge, who's Croatian. Have you?
Oh, no.
No. And I don't know whether he's being interviewed as part of this oral history project, but he played a character in the play who was a kind of Serbian gangster, And Sergeant, lovely, lovely guy, but he was very frightening as the character in the play, and horribly convincing. But he's a lovely guy, and I worked with him subsequently as well, outside of anything to do with border crossings. And he said something, I think it was at the rehearsed reading, it might have been in one of the rehearsals, he said, that doesn't work, that's... And I did too, making a major change, but I don't remember what it was. I just remember that experience of him saying that and thinking, not resenting him saying it, but thinking, oh, thank you so much. It's so helpful that people are honest like that. But I can tell you about the writing and rehearsal process for This Flesh Is Mine, which was the next play I wrote for Border Crossings. Yeah, that similarly came out of educational drama. I had contacts with people in Greece, and I'd been invited. Because I taught some of them on an MA as a guest lecturer on an MA in Birmingham, and they were teaching drama in Greek schools, and they'd set up an association for the teaching of drama. And they invited me to go and do, initially, I did a couple of workshops for them in Athens. So 1 year and then the next year, and they went really well. And they contacted me and said, could you do a series of workshops for us in Athens and Thessaloniki and the town in the east, called Yanina. I can never get the pronunciation right, but I think it's Yanina. So I did, I think, 3 days in Thessaloniki, 3 days in Yanina, and then back to Athens. And they asked me to do these workshops on the Iliad. And at that point, I'd never read the Iliad. So I thought, oh. And I had no idea how to go about it. So I read the Iliad, and I sort of spent quite a lot of time preparing these workshops. A seriously long time, not like, oh, we're going to do this exercise and then this exercise, but thinking, how is this going to work with teachers who are teaching in primary schools as well as secondary schools and sometimes in colleges, and how is that going to work? So I prepared those workshops, went out and did them, and they were great. It was really, really brilliant experience. And when I came back, as I was doing it, I was beginning to think, there's a play here. I think there's a really interesting play here. And Michael and I still meet socially, and we met socially, and I talked it through with him, and he thought, and that point it was just called the Iliad play, and I wasn't sure how it was going to work. And this is a very, very, very strange thing about writing. I look at the beginning of This Flesh Is Mine, and I have no idea where it came from. It uses the Iliad as a starting point, but it doesn't attempt to dramatize the Iliad. And so the characters are all characters from the Iliad. But it starts in classical times, but with hints of, it's almost like the present day is bleeding through into classical times, and the second act is much more in modern times with the same characters, and it doesn't even work as it's not as rigid as that. So I wrote most of what became the first act, and Michael was very enthusiastic about the material and very encouraging, and he's a really good dramaturg, very good reader of material, and he'd set up what he hoped would be a co-production with a company in Beirut in Lebanon. So, and he got funding, which he's incredibly good at getting funding. So he and I went out for a week to Beirut, the name of the company escapes me, but anyway, we went out and they hosted us, and we were working in effectively a large flat in a high rise in Beirut, which part of which was sort of turned into a kind of very small theatre space. And we worked through the scenes, and we worked through various improvisations, and they were really good, and they were really, really good to work with, and it was really exciting. They were quite, and I think it was at that point that the title came to me, "This Flesh Is Mine," because I think in one of the scenes there was, and I honestly don't know where it came from. That's what is so strange about writing. And the title, "This Flesh Is Mine," seems to refer to Achilles talking about his dead lover, but it also is Hecuba referring to her dead son. But it's also Briseis, who is Achilles' lover, her talking about her own body. This flesh is mine, not anybody else's. I cannot be owned. And I didn't know how the second act would work at that point. I had no idea how the second act would work. And we went to Beirut thinking we were going to work to develop that. And there were we had lots of discussions, and it all looked absolutely brilliant. There was was going to be a co-production with them, and it was going to be staged in Beirut, and then it was going to be staged in London. And Michael was looking at theatres in Beirut where it might be staged. And then when we got back about a week later, they pulled out of the project. And Michael and I know why that is, but I'm not sure that I should be talking about that here. So, and I don't think it was to do with the writing. In fact, I'm certain it wasn't to do with the writing, because we agreed. I agreed that one of them would co-write.
Oh yeah.
So we agreed to everything they'd asked for, and then they pulled out of the project. And I don't think I'm prepared to talk about why that might be, because Michael and I know why that is.
Yeah. If you whatever you don't want to talk about,
but it's come for that anyway. So I was devastated. But the experience of being in Beirut was an extraordinary experience. I mean, both Michael and I got horrific food poisoning, really bad, and I know exactly where we got it. It was from hummus, so I like hummus very much, but I was very wary of it after that. And Michael was much worse than I was. I mean, he was really, I was really thought he would have to be hospitalised. He doesn't withdraw from doing stuff, but he just for a day he was just completely out of it. So I then wrote the second act, and I don't know how. Honestly don't know, but it was very much drawing on you draw on experiences, you don't incorporate them.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. The experience, the experiences, whether they're life experiences or workshop experiences, they feed into the play, but it's not kind of representing them. It's like,
it becomes your experiences become a part of you, and when you put yourself into work, then it just happens to then have influence from said experiences.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I mean it's a process that I genuinely don't understand, but what I know, because I still run playwriting courses, and what I say to people when writing the first draft, write fast and loose, just like accept anything, that just get it down there. And then my close friend and colleague who I do most of those courses with, he says, don't get it right, get it writ. Like, get it written, don't think about getting it right, because that's the first draft. You've just got to get something down, and you sort of you immerse yourself in the characters. You somehow get into their heads, they do the talking. That sounds very, very waffly, but that's what it feels like. And I think it's really important that in terms of writing plays, you're in the heads of your characters, and your characters aren't speaking your lines, they're speaking their lines, and so they're not speaking what you want them to say. And if you don't get to that point of them speaking what they want to say, you know that it's not working. And I've done it many times, and I'm very fortunate in having friends and colleagues. Michael is one of them, who look at what I've written and will make, and they know that I want to hear what they have to say. I would love it if they said this is the best play that's ever been written, but it's far more useful if somebody says, I just don't think that works, Brian. So I'm currently working on a play, and which I finished 10 years ago, and Salisbury Playhouse were very interested in it, but it didn't get a production, and I put it away, put it on the electronic equivalent of a back shelf somewhere. And I just think, actually, no, there's a good play in this, but it's not right. It didn't quite work as it was. And my close friend and colleague Rib, he said at the time, I thought that's about the cruelest thing you could say. He said, you know what I think? I think it begins in the last scene should be the first scene, and that's where you should begin, and everything you've written up to that is backstory which we don't see in the play. So so right, thank you, Rib.
Do you think the theatre company in Lebanon pulling out was maybe that sort of, it was feedback maybe?
I think it was to do with the personality. I know it was to do with the personality, and it's not a kind of feedback. It was for me it was a kind of feedback. Yes, is that.
Yeah.
But the actual reason for it was to do with the personality, a personality in that company who was very dominant, but not responsible. And I'm not going to say. I've already said more than I should have done.
But you think you used it as sort of maybe fuel going forward?
I'm sure that's right. Yeah, and I know that quite a lot of the things that happened in the workshop did find their way into the play, but not in the ways that they would appear to at the time. And I'm, for a tiny example, there's a scene in the play quite late in the second half where two of the characters are having coffee. They're just drinking coffee, and it's a kind of scene, almost seems like an interlude, but it's actually a crucial, pivotal scene. And I know that came from discussions that we had in Beirut about people selling coffee on the streets of Beirut, and the people selling coffee on the streets of Beirut could well be people who had fought for Hezbollah, who wanted to pull back from fighting, and so there was a great mass of material, an extraordinary, personal stories we heard when we were in Beirut. So what happened with the play was that we came back. I rewrote the second act. Michael amazingly found the company Ashtar in Ramallah in Palestine, who did want to collaborate and did want to work on it, and he set up a co-production with them, which is and that there were very interesting moments in that. I was at the time when they started rehearsals they had 4 weeks in Ramallah rehearsing, and then the performances in Ramallah, and then he came back to the UK and performed in London at a venue in Battersea, and it was an amazing experience. Really, everybody had the most amazing experience, and not entirely comfortable either, for all kinds of reasons, mostly for political reasons. And I when the play went into rehearsal, I was directing a play in Winchester Prison with prisoners and students from the local the Winchester University, and that was pretty full on. and it was a play that I'd written. I'd been commissioned to write and direct this play, and it was that was a wonderful experience. But I was coming back, I was getting home. So when I'd be getting home about 6 o'clock, having something to eat, and then there would be an email from Michael, or a phone call from Michael from Ramallah, saying, could I rewrite that scene? And there was, he and I have both written about a particular change that was requested. The Palestinian, the director of the Palestinian company, Imam, didn't want the character of Helen, who we know as Helen of Troy, to be part of the play. And the reasons, there were good reasons for it, because in a way Helen is an excuse for a war. Helen isn't the reason that the Greeks attacked Troy. The Greeks attacked Troy because Troy's wealthy. It's a war of attrition, and it's a war like so many wars. It's not to do with what it's said to be about.
Yes.
It's to do with territory, land, and wealth, and Palestinians feel acutely that the Iliad is about them, about their situation.
They see themselves in it.
They see themselves as the Trojans, as being occupied and besieged. And that's why the project appealed. But I felt strongly that Helen had appeared in the play, and the play addressed that business of her being an excuse for a war, and that she was not a willing participant in it in any way. And so I rather reluctantly agreed to write her out of the play, which was quite a major thing to do. And that was while it was in rehearsal in Ramallah, and it was while I was working on my own play in Winchester Prison. And but I did do it, and I do think the play is probably better as a result. Although I'm not as convinced as I've said before that I am. But I think that process of being flexible and going, one of the real excitements about theatre, because I write novels as well, but one of the great things I love about writing theatre is the fact that it's collaborative, that you're working with other people. And those other people might be very prickly at times, and they might say, we can't do that. But you're right. You're right on what you said. It does feed into the play in very positive ways. It feeds into your writing in very positive ways. And if you're not prepared to change, then you shouldn't be doing it, I think. I think that's really important. You see, unfortunately, you see in the theatre, and you see established playwrights who are allowed to get away with, let's be charitable and say, an early draft, and they clearly haven't had somebody say to them, this doesn't work, you need to do this. And I've seen several things in the last couple of years which I think are embarrassingly bad by really well-established playwrights. And I think that is to do with people getting to a stage where people aren't prepared to say to them, or they're not prepared to admit. And I've had this is a real tangent, but I shall have to say it because
Yes.
it's a lovely anecdote. I'd written something which the BBC were really interested in, and I was working with this producer, Martin Pope, and Martin Pope had won a BAFTA for a television play that had been written by Alan Bennett. And I sat in his office, and there behind me was this sort of BAFTA award on the wall. And Martin was great to work with, and he was talking about this series that looked like it was going to happen. And he said, I think you should cut, I think it's something like, I think you should cut the first 10 minutes. You don't need all that. You could start there, and I'm not going to go into what it was. And I must have looked horrified. And he said, Alan Bennett was sat in the chair you're sat in, and he came with that play, which I can't remember the name of, which was the play he won the BAFTA award with. And he said, Alan, I love your play, but the first 40 minutes is redundant. 40 minutes. And Alan Bennett just, oh, do you? oh, all right. And so he changed it, and it became, instead of a 19-minute play, it became a 70-minute play. And I just think that willingness, I learned a lot of lessons from that. You don't just say, oh, okay. You talk about it, and you think, well, why isn't it? What is there in there that I really wanted that needs to go somewhere else or whatever? But I think that sense of working with the people you're working with, that you're actually collaborating with them, is so important.
Yeah. Do you think that the best, in terms of, like, we speak about there's levels to, and then there's people who are at the height of whatever branch of theatre or art. Do you think that in order to be continuously at a great level, you need to be a good student, maybe?
Yeah, I do. So
to be able to get feedback.
Yeah, and you've got to be constantly curious and thinking, anybody can have useful thoughts. My partner has nothing to do with theatre. She's a child psychotherapist, and we go to theatre quite often. And she early on in our relationship, she was very reluctant to read anything of mine before it was, because she just didn't feel qualified. And now she does, and she's quite keen to read stuff, and she reads it, and she still sort of says, I'm not the person to read this. And I said, no, you're exactly the person to read it, because you don't know all the stuff about theatre, but you do know about being in an auditorium and watching a theatre and being bored silly by it. And you know very well about being in a theatre and loving it. And what I'm asking you is how you respond to it. And that's really useful. And she has really, really interesting, useful things to say, but they're not couched in theatre jargon at all. It's very much to do with how she responds to what's there. And she's very insightful in doing what she does. She's very insightful. So, yeah, very much so. Yeah, and I think that sense of continuing to be a student and continuing to learn. And I've always thought, I think it was Arthur Miller said, when somebody was asking him about one of his plays, and he said, well, if I could tell you what it was about, I'll send you a telegram. But I've just spent the last 6 months writing this thing, and that's how long it takes to tell you what I have to say.
Yes. Do you think that pushback also helps maybe justify then if you decide to keep whatever maybe somebody's kind of asking you to change? Do you think it helps you also think through why it's a need to have it there and really fortify whatever thoughts you had behind it?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's a wonderful process, but it's decision heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Very decision heavy.
And frequently you're making decisions all the time, and you're almost not aware that you're doing it. And I'm just to finish the whole. The story doesn't end, but after This Flesh Is Mine, and it was successful. It was very well reviewed. People who saw it really loved it. Michael asked me, and again it's social. I was with him and his family, and we'd gone for a walk with the kids, and he was saying, "How do you feel about writing a companion piece and adapting the Odyssey?" Okay, Michael, thank you. I'd never read the Odyssey either, and it was fantastic. I mean, it was a fabulous commission. because I didn't know it. I knew the stories that a lot of people get as kids, about, the stories of Odysseus, and I knew the stories, I knew some of the stories, but I'd never read the Odyssey, so I had no idea what was actually going on. And I was amazed, I was absolutely amazed at what I found, because it was so unlike what I expected. And I think approaching it as a student, was like, gosh, there's a lot to learn here. There's a lot to, not just to find out about the Odyssey, but also I found, sort of going back to Greek theatre, because I didn't have, I didn't do a conventional degree. I'd never studied Greek theatre. So I was reading those plays for the first time, and I've often thought, sort of how good it is to find stuff and approach it for the first time. And I found that I found one of the extraordinary things about the Odyssey is Odysseus doesn't. There are, I forget how many they're called books, which are like sort of chapters within it, and I think there are 12. But the first 4, Odysseus doesn't appear. He's not in it. He's talked about, but he's not in it. And the central character is Telemachus, his son. And it's like him trying to find out about this absent father. And that was really, really interesting. It's so interesting.
Yeah, I think the writing style is very, it's even like the idea of not having the main character in the first 4. I think there's a lot of great literature that does that very well. I think even like the Bible does that in the first however many chapters before Jesus is born, in the foreshadowing thing. But it's done in the Odyssey. It's done in such a way that you're not waiting necessarily for the character to appear, because you're satisfied with what's there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like, okay, come on, bring this up.
Yeah.
But do you think discovering and reading all these works of literature later in life is the reason you enjoyed them so much? Because I know, like, a lot of the time when people digest things in a more rigid academic environment, it becomes about, maybe if you read it like for GCSEs or A levels, it becomes about trying to extract it's a means to an end.
I sort of half agree with you. It's wonderful coming to stuff late in life, and reading stuff that you maybe should have read earlier, and approaching it without the particular constraints of studying. But I know when I was at school, I hated my secondary school, but I did have a wonderful English teacher, and I remember doing things with him and loving what I was reading. And when I did my Open University degree, I mean, only part of it was, most of it was history in one way or another. And that was in my late 20s, early 30s that I did that. So relatively late to be doing a degree. And I love being able to approach this stuff from the place of not knowing. But I think a lot is to do with teaching, I mean, you're right that a lot of people at university, at school, the pleasure is removed, but I think that is because of bad teaching and a bad education and a seriously repressive educational environment, which is another whole
can of worms.
Yeah. But I think that good teaching, and I've been very privileged to have worked with a number of really, really good teachers, and also, like everybody, have had a number of appalling teachers. And a bad teacher puts you right off.
Yes.
So
I think everybody has a story of, unfortunately, giving up point sometimes.
Yes.
Where they come across one specific teacher, even if they had all amazing teachers before, that kind of kills the passion.
Yeah.
For learning.
Yeah.
Sometimes as a whole. sometimes for a single subject, sometimes for just learning as a whole. Which
Well,
is
and
quite
for
unfortunate.
many kids, that's the experience of secondary school.
Yeah.
You know, they go in really curious and full of life and energy, and everything is exciting, and they leave sort of having been taught to fail. You know,
Yeah.
which is another subject. But are there other questions you want to?
Have you
address?
gone back and read any of the plays that we've spoken about? In
I've
recent
reread
times?
Double Tongue because Michael commissioned this very short play for the Breakthrough Festival that he had that was on in November. So he wanted me to write a kind of what happens next to the central character, and I went back and reread it, and I've done a number of workshops around This Flesh Is Mine, when you know, I've been asked to, I've done stuff with students in secondary schools using that text, but yeah, so that's but I haven't reread When Nobody Returns, which is the Odyssey play. I mean, I read bits of it occasionally, but I don't do it. I do it because I want to look at a particular thing. I haven't read the whole thing as a play. So.
How would you describe your writing style? Because from a lot of them, there's a very international vibe to a lot of them, and there's obviously then the educational drama bit of it.
I'm not sure. I don't have a. I think the two Homer kind of adaptations are written in verse, which I have no idea where that came from, except that, you know, I honestly have no idea. They don't rhyme, but it's in the, and I think it just felt. I think it I mean, when I say I really don't know where it came from, that's absolutely honest. I really don't know where that opening scene, you know, it's which is, I think, very powerful. I don't know where it came from.
Yeah, there's sometimes.
And it set the tone for the. I realised then that the rest of the play had to be it's done in verse. Double Tongue isn't. I mean, Double Tongue is, and it sort of took the form of a kind of series of language lessons, because that's what, and that draws heavily on my own experience of being in Hungary, and Hungarian being such an incredibly difficult language.
Yes.
Not difficult to Hungarians, but it's difficult.
Because I think linguistics is always a very interesting thing, because things like language rules make a world of a difference. And because there's certain, like, that's why even with languages like Danish is also completely linguistic, well, different enough that it can be separated from like Swedish and Norwegian, and they're all in Scandinavia, but even the way the Swedes and the Norwegians speak about how they perceive Danish is always so. You can take it aback, because it's like, oh my goodness. Yeah, if for certain people it's going to be a lot more difficult, because sometimes the rules and the conventions are just they don't land as well in English or in Spanish or French.
And I do know, interestingly, that sense, when I was doing I look back at Double Tongue. The question you asked just a few moments ago was about having reread it, and I was struck by a number of things about it. The form of it is around the language lessons, and there's a kind of irony about that. But I'm reading it, I realised that the characters, the rhythm in which they speak English, I couldn't write it now, because I was immersed in. I was spending quite a lot of time in Hungary, and I was surrounded by people who very good English, but they spoke it in a Hungarian way.
Yeah,
If
with the Hungarian cadence to it.
Yeah, and the Hungarian, it's the rhythm of the way you speak as well. And I think, and I had one of my colleagues in Szeged translated some of it into. She spoke very good English, but she translated some places it was necessary for the character to speak in Hungarian, and she translated it and spoke it to me, and so I needed to hear what it sounded like, even though I didn't really. She told me what it meant, but I needed to hear it, and so when I wrote the 10-15 minute piece for Michael for November, I haven't been back to Hungary, and I couldn't afford to go back and spend time there just for writing that. So I had the central character living in London for the previous 20 years. So I mean, which makes sense in the course, but in terms of both plays.
Yeah.
So she is immersed, and so she occasionally lapses into a very awkward style of speaking English, but most of the time she's very accomplished at speaking English. But it was a kind of cheat in a way, because I couldn't. If I had her in Hungary, I don't know. I know about. I mean, I read about what it's like living in Hungary at the moment, but I don't know it. Whereas previously I knew it from The Curious Outsider, which is one of the characters in the play is a curious outsider who is really excited about being in Hungary but terrified by it as well, which was pretty much where I was at the time. So.
Did you ever have anybody in mind when you wrote any plays that you've written?
Interesting.
For an audience.
For an audience?
Yeah, like did you have a specific person that you were writing for?
No, not for those plays. For the theatre and education plays, yes, because they were written for specific age groups of children. But I did have in writing When Nobody Returns, which is the Odyssey play. We knew that we wanted to cast particular actors in particular roles, and I knew that Andrew French would be playing Odysseus, and I knew that Iman would be playing Penelope, and I wrote very specifically for them, which was a very interesting experience because I've not done that before.
Oh. How did you feel about the change of then writing for specific people?
I don't have a feeling about it. It was great. I mean, Andrew, I'm very fond of Andrew. He's a wonderful actor, and he's a lovely friend. So I mean, I didn't, and he's also. I also know that he would write. He would do something really difficult. If the role demanded that if he thought it was written with integrity, then he would throw himself into it. He wouldn't resist doing something because he didn't like it. And he and I had talked a lot about aspects of our lives which inform the Odysseus character. In one sense, what the play is about is fathers and sons. Telemachus, the son, Odysseus, the absent father, who eventually returns or doesn't. And at that, and those conversations with Andrew informed the play. But it wasn't. I mean, I think it's not written exclusively for him. Had somebody else, had Andrew's been, got some major film role and been unable to take the part, and somebody else playing it, then they could probably have done a good job, and it just wouldn't have been Andrew. So, and I think that sort of that very strange movement between the role and the person and the character is an intriguing one, but it's not one that I explored in any depth in any of those plays.
Is there a specific moment, and this doesn't have to be theatre related, in your life that you look back to and you're particularly proud or fond of?
Yeah, I think in terms of being particularly proud, you know, becoming a father, that was amazing, just amazing, and it changed my life completely. But in terms of professionally, I think the thing I'm most proud of was the play that I'm very proud of This Flesh Is Mine. But I think the play I'm most proud of is a play called Stand or Fall, which was specifically, it was commissioned to be done in Winchester Prison. And I spent 3 months working with prisoners beforehand, before writing it, to get a sense of them. And I think the production was amazing, and the experience was amazing, and I don't think there's anything will ever beat that, just because, you know, it's such an extraordinarily big event for everybody taking part in it. But the audiences were in raptures over it. It was an amazing experience.